We're going to be in Esther chapter 4, and then we're going to get into Esther chapter 5 today. And then I'm going to be at camp all this week, so if you come into the office, you will not find me, and I will be hanging out with 150 5th and 6th grade ratty kids. So wish me luck, wish them luck, pray for us, it'll be a good time. Need help, need prayers. So get to Esther chapter 4, and I'm going to tell you about a story about two hunters, okay? There's two guys that like to, every year, take a trip to Alaska. And so what they'll do is they'll take a flight, get into Alaska, and then they'll go to a different, smaller airport and get on a little, hardly any room in the plane. I'm talking about one engine, a propeller front. I mean, it is tiny. And they fly and they go land on the water of a lake in the middle of nowhere, and then they go and they hunt moose. They take a few days out of every year to go to the same spot and to go hunt moose. It's a tradition of theirs that they do every single year. And so they load up all their gear, get in the little tiny plane, fly down there, land on the water, and then they shuttle up to the dock. The one little bit of civilization that is there is a piece of wood in the water that they can walk on. And the pilot says, all right, good luck to you guys. Happy hunting. I'll be back in 3 days to pick you up. So the pilot, shuttles back onto the water and then takes off into the distance. And these three guys are left to go hunt these two guys are left to hunt for 3 days, trying to find some moose to kill the moose. And then 3 days later, what happens is the pilot comes back, lands on the water, comes down, shuttles up, and the two guys, they load up all their gear, same gear, and they bring out this big old moose, a big, good haul, and they bring it up, strap it to the pontoons, and then the pilot says, all right, let's go. And they said, what are you talking about? We got 2 more moose back there. And the pilot says, hold on now. Do you know how big a moose is? Do you know how small this plane is? And so they get into a bit of an argument. They go back and forth talking about wind speed and water and how much space there is and how tall the trees are and the weather and the things that I do not understand, things that are over my head. They're debating for, 10, 20 minutes. And finally, the two hunters say, I'll tell you what, guys, we do this every year. Last year, same guys, same lake, same amount of gear, same number of moose, same type of plane, same weather conditions. Everything's the same. Only thing different is you, Mr. Pilot. So the pilot says, all right, fine, you strap it on there. Let's see what happens. So they strap on the 2 extra moose. So there's giant moose strapped to the bottom of this plane, getting pretty heavy. And they're like, we're going to need some extra room. So they shuttle off into the weeds and the brush and the nastiness on the edge of this lake. And then the two guys, the two hunters, they lean out the window, hold on to the trees, while the pilot revs up the engine, going full throttle, holding it back, and then finally he says, all right, let go. So they let go, and they shoot across the water, and then getting up, getting wood, but they're heading straight for some trees. And they go up, and they hit the trees. They skim over the tops of the trees, and they crash land on the side. Everybody lives, but it's not a pleasant experience. It's a plane crash. It's not hard to be a good time when a plane crashes. And so after a couple minutes of them making sure everybody's alive and conscious, the two hunters, they start laughing. They start cracking up. They go, I can't believe it. And the pilot said, what are you talking about? I thought you said you did this last year. What are you laughing for? Yeah, we made it 50 yards farther than last year. No. That's making some progress, right? That's progress. That's good. We want that. Now, with our lives in Christianity, we should be making progress 50 yards a day. That'd be great, 50 yards a year. We should be moving forward, making progress, even if it's a little bit and doesn't seem that great. We should be moving forward and making progress. Now, can I read a verse that is difficult, that is hard for us to hear, that is impossible for us to do? And it's a command by Jesus. A command given by Jesus that we are incapable as humans of doing. Follow along. Here's what he says. Therefore, you therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Anybody in here perfect? How about that? Anybody known anybody who's ever been perfect? How about that? That is a difficult and impossible task. And yet that is what we are called to. We are called to be perfect, but we're not. Now here's the deal. We should be making progress towards perfection. We cannot be perfect while we are in this life on this earth. We cannot be perfect, but we should be making progress towards perfection. And this is what Paul talks about in his letter to the Philippians. Not that I've already obtained any of this. Talking about some good stuff in there. Not that I've already obtained this or am already perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm not there, but I press on to make it my own. I make progress towards perfection. I'm not perfect, but I make progress towards perfection because Christ Jesus has made me His own. Now, in that passage of Philippians, you're going to see a few other words in the verses around that are like that one in there. I press on, or I strain for, I run the good race. I am moving forward towards perfection. I'm moving towards the goal. I'm not perfect, but I'm making progress towards perfection. Now, the reality is we cannot be perfect while we are on this life. We follow? Now, this is what salvation, okay? Salvation is kind of split up into three parts, where there's justification, where we are, that's whenever you accept Christ and your sins are wiped clean and you are free from the penalty of sin, okay? And then after that comes sanctification. We've heard that word. That's a good church word. Sanctification, which means we are corrupt, we are twisted, and now we're straightening ourselves out. Does that, you follow along? That is the progress we're talking about. That's the area that we're going to be talking about today, making progress in sanctification towards perfection. And the third part of salvation is glorification, where we go into heaven, where we experience Jesus Christ and God the Father on the throne in the beautiful streets. That's what we're making our progress towards. We're not there yet, but we are in progress towards that. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And that is what Esther and Mordecai are going to be doing today in our chapters 4 and 5 of Esther. So we're going to look at two ways that Mordecai makes progress and two ways that Esther makes progress. And I promise that they will not all be as long as this first one, okay? I promise you that one. So here's the first way. We're going to see that our main characters, our protagonists of the story, Esther and Mordecai. First of all, Mordecai, he is making progress by mourning. He's making progress by mourning, by grieving something. So before we get too far, let's recap what's going on, okay? Esther and Mordecai, after the Jewish enslavement by Babylonia, are now in the land of Persia, which is the kingdom of the area. This is the world power led by Xerxes. He's the third generation in this empire. They own everything. They're all over the place. And what happens is Esther and Mordecai, Esther gets taken into the king's palace, goes through this beauty pageant, goes through the bachelor, becomes queen, and then Mordecai, her cousin, who's her adopted father, what he does is he gets a official job at the king's gate doing something, and then there's this guy who gets promoted, and Haman and Mordecai don't like each other. Haman gets promoted, Mordecai doesn't. Mordecai and Haman don't like each other. So Mordecai refuses to bow down, refuses to pay homage, refuses to respect, to salute, to bow down, to give honor to. He does not do anything that would be respectful or honorable towards Haman. Doesn't like him. And then what happens is Haman finds out, gets ticked off, and wants to kill Mordecai. But not just Mordecai. He wants to kill all of the Jews. And they're Jews, they're upwards of 15 million. That's a bunch, by the way. That's a whole lot of people. And so that's what's happening. Haman decrees that they're going to be killed. All of the Jews are going to be wiped out. And then whenever Mordecai hears word, he mourns. He grieves this fact. Look at this, Esther chapter 4, verses 1, 2, and 3. Now, whenever Mordecai learned all that had been done being Haman going to Xerxes, bribing Xerxes, giving him money, flattering him, saying, hey, you should kill all of these people. After he had learned all of these things, Mordecai tore his clothes, put on his sackcloth and ashes, went out into the midst of the city, and he carried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. Now, sackcloth and ashes, that is the traditional Jewish, that's the traditional Old Testament, ancient world rite of mourning. What they would do is they put on a burlap sack that hurts, that's coarse, that doesn't feel good, and they put some fire ash up on their heads, and then they would go out in the streets and cry and yell and make a show, okay? They would let everybody know, I'm mourning right now. That's pretty bizarre for us, because can you imagine if your family member dies and then you go out on the street, rip open your shirt, ah! It's bizarre, okay? That's just not what we experience. That is a different world, different culture, but that is how they mourn. It is very public, very open, and very obvious. And that's why Mordecai goes to the king's gate, to the place where all of the people are going to be. Everybody's going to see him, and Mordecai, we might not see this as progress, but Mordecai is making progress by mourning. He's mourning and letting everybody know this. It's an odd look, but it's forward progress. Now, it's not just Mordecai either. It is, did you see that in verse 3? In every province, wherever the king's command. This is 127 all over the place. The entire world at the time is Persia. They own everything, and everywhere there's a Jew, they hear about this, and they mourn in the same way that Mordecai does. They are making progress forward. Now, Esther, she doesn't catch word, okay? She's in the palace. She doesn't hear about this decree yet, and she has to learn about it through Mordecai. And this is what happens in verse 4. Now, when Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, so Esther's got these servants that attend to her, and Esther's servants know that her and Mordecai are friends and are acquaintances and like each other, and they say, hey, your buddy Mordecai, here's what it is, your buddy Mordecai, he's dressed funnily. And when Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She gets distressed. She says, why is Mordecai in mourning attire? What's going on? And now she sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Okay, anybody change your own oil, okay, in your car? I changed my own oil, did it last Sunday. What did I wear? A cut-off shirt with oil and paint and nastiness all over it, okay? You don't put on, I'm not going to go change oil in these clothes. We follow along? This is not the right attire to change oil in. Now imagine if you're changing oil in your house, I see you in funny clothes, ratty, dirty clothes, cut-off jeans and overalls, clothes that you would not wear out in public. I see you wearing that and I say, you should be wearing something nicer. So I buy you a nice suit or a nice dress and I say, you should be wearing this instead. I need to change oil. I'm not going to change oil in that. That's kind of what Mordecai and Esther's situation is. She doesn't realize that he's mourning. Doesn't realize that he's changing oil. Hey, have these clothes. That's not the right time for those clothes. This is the right time for me to mourn. And this is very bizarre to us, very foreign to us. Because if there's anybody in this story that we are like in these first 4 verses, it's not Mordecai, it's not the Jews, it's not even Esther. Because Mordecai, he's mourning publicly for a loss, publicly mourning for a tragic time. Esther, she's just confused and not sure what's going on. If anybody, we're Xerxes in this story. Look to verse 2 with me, okay? Look at verse 2. Haman went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. Now, why were they not allowed? Because the king doesn't want to hear about your sad times, okay? The king doesn't want to have sadness around him. Only tell me the good things of the kingdom. Anybody else? Only tell me the good things. I get on Facebook to see who is doing well. I don't post anything that's negative on there. Only the good things. If I ask you, hey, how you doing? You know what you're going to say? I'm fine. Even if you're going through a divorce, even if you got cancer, even if your son just died, okay? Are you fine? Yeah, I'm fine. And then you go away and you're dealing with depression. This is bizarre for Western culture because we just don't get mourning. And here's a couple reasons why mourning is good and mourning is progress, even though it's so foreign and bizarre to us, okay? Now, first of all, mourning is just simply honest. Mourning is telling the truth. Okay? Because whenever I ask you, hey, how you doing? And you say fine, even though you're going through a traumatic event, sounds like a lie to me. If you are not fine and you say I'm fine, that's a lie. You hear me? If I am not doing well and you ask me, hey, Clayton, how you doing? I say, I'm doing well. Life's good. Love it. It's great. I am lying. Mourning is simply being honest with your emotions. It is simply being honest. Now, that's not to say that every person, any run-of-the-mill Joe Schmo you see on the road, that you should pour out your feelings on. But those who love you, those who care about you, those who are close to you, those in this church, if we ask you, how are you doing, and you say fine and you are not fine, that's a problem. That is a lie. It is not being honest. Now, here's another one. God himself mourned. Okay? We have a great example from the creator of the universe to mourn. Back in Genesis chapter 6, right before the flood, God is looking at humanity going, man, they're rotten. And what does it say? God regretted that he made mankind, and then the wickedness grieved God to the heart. It grieved him. He mourned for how corrupt we had become. It's something that God does. It is an example set by God. And then in the New Testament, we get Jesus come along. His friend dies, and we get the shortest verse, Jesus wept. It's not to help others. It's because he is genuinely sad. He's genuinely grieving, and he openly expresses his mourning. That's what Jesus does. That's a great example. And also, mourning acts as a release valve for stress, okay? Because if we just bottle everything up, put it inside, then it builds and builds and builds and builds and builds, and then all of a sudden we explode on somebody. You know what I'm talking about? But if we mourn biblically, correctly, accurately, and whenever it is necessary, then that is a release valve for that stress. It lets things out without it blowing up, and it's healthy. And here's the biggest reason that I think we should mourn, because it gives other people a chance to love you, okay? It gives other people a chance to love you. Now, if I never know that you're going into the hospital, how can I pray for you? If I never know that you're going through a tough time, how can I be there for you? But if you publicly mourn, let people know that things are not perfect, then they have a chance to come and help you, come and love on you, and come experience God's love with you even though times are rough. Okay? Mourning is healthy. Mourning is progress. Even though it's bizarre, foreign, and counter to all of our Western culture, it is an absolute good thing. Mourning is healthy. Mourning is progress. We should be mourning. Whenever times are sad, we should be mourning. So first of all, we see people making progress by mourning, which seems a little bizarre, making progress by mourning. And then one that probably makes a little more sense to us, making progress by encouraging other people, by encouraging. Because what is Esther and Mordecai? Mordecai's mourning. Esther doesn't know why. And then Esther gets filled in by Mordecai. Here it is, chapter 4. And we're going to read verses 5 through 9, okay? Esther 4:5. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. Hathach went to Mordecai to the open square of the city in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree in Susa for their destruction, so that he might show it to Esther and explain to her and command her to go to the king and beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. And Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. So Mordecai says, hey, Esther, this evil, corrupt guy, you know about him because he's the king's right-hand man and you're the king's wife. You know this guy. He has commanded all of our people killed. Here's a copy of proof. Here's how much money he's bribing the king with. What are you going to do about it? Here's an idea. Go talk to the king. There's only one guy in the kingdom of Persia that's higher than Haman, and it's Xerxes. So, Esther, you who's married to the king, maybe you should go talk to the king. Maybe try and convince him murdering 15 million Jews is a bad idea. Okay? That's the plan. That is an encouragement for him. Hey, go talk to the king. Here's an idea. Go offer some help. Go help our people. And Mordecai encourages Esther. But there's a problem. Now, there's a problem that we see in verse 10 and 11. And this is Esther's response. Now Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all of the king's servants and all of the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. So here's the problem. Mordecai, he encourages Esther, hey, go ask for some help, we need some help. And then what does Esther say? Have you heard the law of the land? If I go before the king without him calling me, you know what the rule is? Kill me. Okay, so imagine this. You go into the throne room, you have a petition for the king, you have something that you need from the king, something that the king only can do, and so you go into his throne room, and one of the guards just say, all right, while you're giving your request, come set your head on this block, please. Pardon? Go ahead and just sit down, get on your knees, put your head on that block. Okay, so you get down there, you put your head on the block, and then the axe comes down and chops your head off. That's the law. That is the law of the land. Now, in fact, you can actually look up pictures of these, I don't know what it's called, a stele or a hieroglyph, whatever it is, a picture depicting Persian culture where there's a king on the throne, and behind him, there's a guy with a big old axe. Okay? Imagine walking in, by the way, anybody seen Star Wars? Any of the Star Wars movies? Okay? You got the big bad guy, the Emperor, all right? You know, the electric fingers, that guy. You guys haven't seen the movies. The big bad guy, the evil, corrupt guy in the whole, okay? He's on his throne, and who's surrounding him? These guys in red with these big pikes, okay? And what happens if you go and stand before the emperor? Those guys in red are going to come slaughter you, okay? You walk before the king without him requesting you, you will die, okay? And unless the king says, oh, hold on, no, don't kill him. He's all right. Now, that is the default situation. Now, the default situation is come in, and then if you get ticked off at him, then kill him. No, the default, the standard is kill them without questions. Kill first, ask later. Hard to ask a dead body. Okay, that is the situation. And Esther goes, he's going to kill me. Remember what happened to the last chick who disobeyed the king? Listen, remember what happened to the last person who rejected the king? Got kicked out, rejected, banished. That's a bad deal. And then she says, he hasn't even called me for 30 days. He's probably forgotten about me by now because he's got a whole harem of women. He's probably forgotten about me by now. But Mordecai doesn't lose heart. Mordecai encourages her even more. Look at verse 12 in Esther chapter 4. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said, and then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. Okay, kind of take a side note right here. This possibly could be a veiled threat by Mordecai. Help me, or I'm going to tell everybody you're a Jew. It could be. It could also be they're going to find out you're a Jew and then you will be killed. You're not exempt from this. Either way, Mordecai is saying, hey, Esther, you're part of this group that's getting massacred. You're part of this group that's going to have a genocide acted out on them. Okay, verse 13. That was verse 13. Now verse 14. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Here's Mordecai's encouragement. You're going to die if you don't do this. You might die if you do this, but you're definitely going to die if you don't. Okay? Would you rather have a slim chance of living or a certain death? Slim chance of living, please. That's what he sets up. And what if, Esther, what if you are here for this reason? What if you are queen for no other reason than to save our people? You have a chance, Esther. And he encourages her and says, go do this. This could be why you are queen. Help our people. You have the ability to help, so do it. Now, sometimes you and I need a good kick in the rear like Esther gets, okay? Hey, wake up, go do something. A little bit of encouragement. That's what I'm here to do. Wake up, go do something. That's what you're here to do. Wake up, go do something. Whenever you see a friend of yours not doing right, not where they have a chance to do something good and then don't, the book of James and I think the book of 1 John say that's a sin. So kick them in the rear, get them to go do it. And then when you get kicked in the rear, don't get mad at the foot, get mad at yourself for standing still too long. Make progress by encouraging other people. So that's how Mordecai has made progress so far. Now let's look at what Esther has been doing. Let's look at what Esther is going on. And she's going to make progress by planning. She's going to be making progress by planning stuff. Now, up until this point, Esther has been a passive, a static, a do-nothing character. You follow? Because what has happened is Esther's parents have died. That's something that happens to her. Esther gets adopted by Mordecai. Something that happens to her. Esther gets put into the beauty contest. Happens to her. Esther gets chosen by the king. Happens to her. Everything is happening to Esther, and Esther does not actively do anything. But now, this chapter 4 acts as a hinge where Esther before has been doing nothing. Now she starts to do stuff. Now she gets put into action. Now she starts actually doing things, commanding people. Now, throughout this, Mordecai has been commanding Esther, go to the king's palace. Go do this. Don't tell anybody you're a Jew. Go do this. Go do that. Mordecai is commanding her. And now Esther no longer takes any commands. Esther now starts doing the commanding. Look back to chapter 4. And we're going to look at verses 4 and 5. Now when Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her the queen was deeply distressed. Now she sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. What does Esther do? She says, here's something that you can actively do. Here's some action. Here's some progress. Verse 5. And then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go. What did she do? She ordered him. Something that she has not done yet. She takes action and orders him, does something. And now that she's heard what's going on, now that she understands the plot against the Jews, now that she understands how wicked and evil Haman is, she starts to plan. She takes action, and she's got an idea. Look at verse 15. And then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa. Hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat, do not drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. And then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther ordered him. Esther has not commanded anybody to this point, and then starts to build up a little bit of courage, starts to understand, gets encouraged by Mordecai, gets a little kick in the rear, and says, okay, here's an idea. Here's something that we can do. Go get all of the Jews, all your friends, all your neighbors, all your cousins, all your friends, everybody you know, gather together, don't eat, don't drink, fast for me and my friends, we will do the same, and then on the third day, I'll go to the king. I've got a plan. Here it is. Let's do something. Now, whenever she says, let's go fast, typically in the Bible that is accompanied with prayer, but it's not mentioned in here. It's not mentioned. The author doesn't say they fasted and prayed. Now, it could be that it's implied, but it could be that Esther's not quite there yet. It could be that she's only fasting and not praying. And I think that's probably the option because it kind of shows this incremental progression of Esther where she starts to plan this fast, but maybe not necessarily praying just yet. I mean, she's not perfect, but she's getting there. She's making progress, and so she starts the plan. She starts to move forward. Here's an idea. Here's something that we can do to help the people of God. Let's go out and do it. So Esther, she makes progress by planning this. And now here's the last one that we're going to look at. Esther, she makes progress by risking. Because remember the law? You go stand before the king and you're going to die. So she says, you know what? I'm going to risk it. I am going to risk it. Look at the law again, verse 11, 4:11. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know any man or woman, they're not excluded, goes to the king inside the inner court without being called. There's one rule, one law, one thing that should be done, be put to death, axe to the neck. Your head will be separated from your torso via the neck and axe. That's what the law is. And she says, I will risk it. That's what she says. I am going to risk it. Chapter 5, verse 1. On the third day, after they've been fasting for 3 days, on the third day, Esther put on her royal robes, put on her pretty garments, beautiful clothing, and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's quarters while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. She comes into the throne room, stands there across the hall, sees King Xerxes on his throne, and behind him she sees the head of the axe of the mean guy in royal robes, ready to kill anybody who walks through that door. That's a risk. Anybody else follow me? That is a dangerous time that she puts herself in, a dangerous situation that she willingly walks into and risks her life to save the people of God. And now look at this, verses 2 and 3. Remember the contingency? If the king raises up his scepter, don't kill them. Verse 2. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight, and he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. And then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. So she risks her life once and makes it through. And now verse 3. And the king said to her, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you, even to half of my kingdom. Anything you want, you name it, you got it. Because the king knows it's a risky business to come stand in his presence without being requested. And so the king says, she must have something important. What do you have, Esther? What would you like? I'll give it to you. You can live, and I love you so much, anything you want, I'll give it to you. And what does Esther do? Is she's going to risk her life again. Listen to this. Esther chapter 5, verses 4 and 5. And Esther said, if it please the king, and by the way, that's a phrase that's repeated throughout this book, kind of implying that King Xerxes is kind of a wishy-washy type guy. That's a free thing right there. Esther said, if it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I've prepared for the king. She says, hey, listen, I've been preparing this feast. Why don't you and your right-hand man come hang out with me and eat dinner with me. It'll be a good time. And the king said, bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther has asked. So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. And then what happens at the feast, as we're going to see in a second, is that Xerxes says, hey, what is your request? What is your wish? What does that mean? Is that feast is not her request. What that means is the king says, what is your request? I'll give it to you. And Esther says, why don't you just wait a little while for me to tell you? Telling the king to wait, danger. I am not patient. Patience? None. No patience. I got no patience, okay? Now, can you imagine this king who's proud, no patience, sitting up on the throne, hey, what would you like? I'll tell you tonight. Off with her head. That's a risk if you ask me. And then what happens at the dinner, look at verses 6, 7, and 8 now. And as they were drinking wine after the feast, kind of like, our drinking coffee after dinner or whatever, drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, what is your wish? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Even to half the kingdom, it will be fulfilled. And then Esther answered, my wish and my request is, if I found favor in the king's sight, if it please the king, grant my wish, fulfill my request. Let the king and Haman come to my feast I'm preparing tomorrow. What does she do? She says, I'll tell you tomorrow. Hey, what do you want? I'll tell you tonight. Okay, now it's tonight. What do you want? I'll tell you tomorrow. Kill her. Okay, it is not something that I'm willing to do to the king. If I'm going to go up to the president and say, hey, I have a request. Okay, what is it? Come to my dinner and I'll tell you. And he comes to my dinner and he says, all right, Clayton, what do you have? Come to my dinner tomorrow and I'll tell you then. Chances are he's not going to be coming and eating dinner with me 2 nights in a row. I'm not that important, okay? That is just not the way it goes. Esther risks her life to even be in the presence of the king, risks her life to request of the king, risks her life to say, hey, wait a little bit, I'll tell you later, risks her life over and over again, all because she's making progress. Now, kind of think of it like this. How do you know if a little child has faith, okay? Say you're in the pool swimming, okay? And 2, 3, 4-year-old in the water, up on the ledge, dad's in the water, jump, I'll catch you. Will you? How do you know if that child has faith? If they jump, if they take that risk and jump into dad's arms. That's how you know. And Esther, we don't know when along this time that she gets baptized, she gets saved, she becomes a devout Jew. We don't know. But what we do know is at this point, she has faith because she risks her life all for God and God's people. Esther makes a plan, and then she goes out there and risks her life, and she's making progress. She's not perfect, but she's making progress. Now, how about you and I? Are we making progress? Because we should be moving forward. We should be getting closer to perfection. We can never get it while we're still alive in this world, but we should be moving towards that. Are you making progress? Now, I had a professor, while I tell this, you guys can come up and play. I had a professor who explained it like this, and I don't know if you should be this harsh with yourself, but he's a very godly man, and I respect him a lot. And he said that you should look back on yourself from 6 months ago and hate the person you used to be. Okay? And I'm not saying you need to be that harsh, but I'm saying you need to be making progress to where you look back at your former self and go, whew, that was rough times. That is a corrupt, evil human being. You need to be making progress. So as we're going to go and sing, as we're going to go into the world and out there, ask yourself a few questions. Who can you be mourning with? Who can you be help mourning? How can you mourn? What is an effective and healthy way to mourn and help other people mourn? How can you love people in mourning? And then how can you encourage other people? And in what ways do people need to be encouraged? And how can you do that? And then what plans do you need to make? What things need to be done that you need to make a plan? And what do you need to risk? What things can you do so that you can risk even up to your very life, all to give glory to God? Not that I've already obtained this or am perfect, but I press on to make it my own because Jesus has already made me His own. We must be making progress.